radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
Well. Good evening. How you doing? It's Fade to Black. Today is Wednesday, October 9th, 2024. Let's do this, man. I am your host, Jimmy Church, and I want to just get this out right away. Our thoughts and energies are 100% focused right now on Florida, all of it. And I just can't imagine what they are going through out there so close together. Helene and now Milton. Milton has made landfall and is moving across Florida. So our thoughts and energies are headed that way. Okay, so you are with us tonight. That means you're probably following the news, but you also want to try to escape some of the madness in the world. That's why you are here, and to explore. We're going to do all of that tonight. We've had a great week on the show. Monday, Douglas Grunther was here, The Quantum and the Dream, an amazing conversation. Last night, Hans Dietrich was here, The Magic of Symbols and his research around the world. Great conversation. Tonight it continues. Dr. Diane Hennessy is with us. Now, I've called this show, I stole it from her, Neuroscience and You. And we're going to talk about the brain tonight, but just about every aspect of it and her research and what is going on. And we're going to push this out a little bit. Let's get into some of the supernatural and some of the other things that may be going on with our brain that science struggles to recognize, as they also struggle to figure out what the brain actually does and is. So we'll be doing all of that tonight. Tomorrow night, it's my birthday. Yeah, as if you didn't know that. Yeah, tomorrow's my birthday. And I just wanted to celebrate it with all of you with an AMA and an AJA. And that's it. We'll just hang out tomorrow night and have a good time and celebrate my birthday together. How's that sound? All right, so that's tomorrow night. And really quick, I've got 3 major events coming up. It's going to be 5, but right now I've got 3 on the books. I'm squeezing in 2 more here, and I'll have that announced by Monday. But I've got Peru and Bolivia coming up next month with Brian Forrester. That's November 15th through the 27th. Links for that are below. Then I'm hosting the Conscious Life Expo at the LAX Hilton here in Los Angeles, California, the largest conference in the world. It's the biggest and the best, and this year may be the biggest and the bestest yet. The links for that are below. That's February 7th through the 10th, 2025. And then right after that, I'm heading out to Sedona, Arizona, for Rise of the Guardians, and that's March 29th and 30th, 2025 in Sedona, Arizona. Again, the links for everything are below. All right, now, tonight, Dr. Diane Hennessy is with us. And what's very interesting about this, before I bring Diane in, is the other day, I do this often enough. One of my favorite movies of all time is a movie called Defending Your Life. And extraordinary film, extraordinary. So aside from how great the film is and how it deals with the afterlife and everything else, is Rip Torn. Rip Torn. When it's one of my favorite lines in the movie, when he says, well, he's the defender, right? He's the lawyer, he's the defender. And he says, humans only use 3 to 5% of their brain. I use 48. And now you just kind of stop right there. What kind of statement is that? And is that 3 to 5% thing, is that dogma that has worked its way into truth? Or is that something solid? And then Rip says another comment when he disappears for a day. And where were you? And he goes, oh, you wouldn't understand. No, but where were you? And he says, I was stuck at the circle of fault. I don't understand. I told you. And that's where, is there a place where we can go in our brain to explore these areas and ideas? Is there a way to access the rest of that? We're going to do all of that tonight with Diane. And she is a neuropsychiatrist, a neuroscientist, former Harvard faculty member with a private practice in Oregon, a Johns Hopkins trained clinician and award-winning author. She has worked internationally. And now on top of all of that, she has researched human consciousness, telepathy, precognition in autistic children, and authored the ESP Enigma. Her work has also been featured in the 2012 compilation Seriously Strange, following a symposium at Wasan Island. Her website, drdianehennessy.com, is below on social media and over on our website. I would like to welcome to Fade to Black for the first time, Dr. Diane Hennessy. She's right there. Good evening.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and thank you so much. And before we get started, you get the first time guest disclaimer. So let's get that out of the way. Let's get that out, Diane. And it's kind of funny that I'm saying that to you, but this is the disclaimer. Diane, it's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends. Where the conversation starts, it starts. Where it ends, but we're going to end as friends. Now, you have to accept so we can continue.
I accept.
Yeah, love it. All right. Now, this is a broad stroke of the pen, but this is because we're going to go back and forth tonight. We're going to go left and right, hither and thither. We're going to go back and forth. But let's actually start with a big stroke of the pen, which is, you heard what I just said about the 3 to 5% thing, right? And is that dogma that has worked its way into truth? So that's part of the question. The other part of it is, why is it that the more the hard sciences and the medical and universities around the world research the brain, it seems that we know less, and we've been trying to push this forward. With your research, does that seem to be the case, and am I wrong?
Well, let me say this, okay? I don't know how much your audience knows about genetics, okay? But I'm going to use that as an analogy, okay? Because I was actually, in addition to training in neuropsychiatry, I trained in genetics and was part of the Human Genome Project. And at the time that we thought that if we sequenced the human genome, that we would find all these answers to understanding, things, about disease and, and how the brain worked, et cetera, human variation. We were shocked when we found out that there are only around 20 to 22,000 genes. Okay. Now, think about this. Only 1.5% of those genes differ from chimpanzees. We share more than half of our genetics with a banana.
That's right.
So obviously we are paying so much attention to these protein coding genes that are part of our chromosome. Well, they're only 10% of our chromosome. Okay, so it was like all of the rest of it was treated like it was scaffolding and had nothing to do with anything. It was just the structure that held the important bits there. And it's all in that 10%. Well, obviously, it's not all in that 10%. And so what we know is that the control switches for those genes are in the other 90%. And I would say that the same holds true for the brain. Neurons, which is what people talk about because that's what generates the electromagnetic signals. Neurons are only 10% of the brain cells in our brain. What are the rest of them doing that are the support crew? And as it turns out, if you look at what they are, if you're a cellular biologist studying them, what you realize is that they're actually far more complex than neurons, which are so this model that neuroscience has been operating out of, I compare it to like a Rube Goldberg model, where it's like, this lever, drops a ball on this, lever that does this, so it's like, oh, this neuron, it, releases this neurotransmitter that then causes these neurons to do this and that. Well, that's only 10% of the brain. And we've been ignoring 90% of the brain. And there is a lot of research now that is out there about the rest of this brain. And it's far more fascinating than research about neurons. But the focus has been on the neurons, just like the focus has been on genes.
The Brain Project in Switzerland with the computers, right? And when that project first started, in its simplicity, it made a lot of sense. Let's build this server farm with enough transistors in it to duplicate the neuron count in the brain. And if we do that, we should have a supercomputer that can operate the same as the brain, right? So they get to that neuron count, right? They get to that transistor count. And they got nothing, right? They just got a big computer, and there's billions of dollars. That building is incredible, right? and everything that, and they get there, and there was no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Yeah, I don't know if they were expecting the computer to become sentient and that things are going to start firing off and it's going to be telling jokes or whatever, but none of that happened. And that isn't that telling that all the focus is on neuron count. You're right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, there are these cells in the brain, like they're called glial cells. They're the white matter. Okay. And there are these cells that are called astrocytes. Okay. And they're named that because they're star-shaped, because they have so many interconnections with so many others. And it turns out that the synapse that we thought was between one neuron and another neuron is actually a tripartite synapse, where you have the astrocyte has its little process there monitoring what's happening between those two and can modify it and can connect with far more cells simultaneously. Okay. And on top of that, astrocytes are the stem cells of the brain. And what I mean by stem cells is that they have the capacity to change into any kind of cell that is needed. If they need to change into being a neuron, they can become a neuron. Or if they need to change into being another different type of glial cell, they can change into that. So what we see that differs in terms of people and their brains, a lot of it has to do with what percentage of our brain is comprised of astrocytes. It can differ from 10 to 20% of our brain is astrocytes. In fact, when we look at Einstein's brain, what we saw is that he had a lot more white matter, which implies that he had more of these astrocytes, which are really more of what we think are like the quantum computers in the brain.
Now, okay, I have two questions. I'm going to try to remember the second one. Let's go to the first one first, because just staying with where we are right now on this track is, at one point we had cell division, right? One cell into 2, into 4, into 8, and 16, and 32, but those are cells. And then at some point, things get a little more sophisticated, and systems are built, and brains and nervous systems, and DNA, and all of this is happening. It seems too magical that these processes developed into you and I having this conversation tonight, where you just go from simple cell division to these complex organisms that not only you and I, but make up the rest of the world and the rest of the universe. Do you think that there's something divine there that came in and intercepted this? Was there something else in this creation, or is it just chemistry and biology?
It's not just, well, I wouldn't say it's just chemistry and biology. I mean, what happened to me, I was raised an atheist. And what happened to me was that the deeper that I got into science, my father was a scientist. He was the head of the artificial heart program at Battelle.
Ooh.
And so, I mean, I was a kid who grew up with science kids. You know, at 4 years old, I'm there, you know, playing with a, you know, crystal radio and, you know, soldering and, you know, electronic components, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Okay. And so I really had this materialist model for thinking about how things work. And I realized that when I was an undergraduate, that really understanding the brain was what I was most interested in. It was like the big frontier. And what I realized was that they don't understand anything. Okay. Yeah, you know, they don't have a model that explains anything. Okay, we have a lot of correlations between this and that. You have damage to this part of the brain, and you'll see these particular behavioral syndromes, but that doesn't explain anything. And so the deeper I went into science, the more I realized how this is not accidental.
Right.
There's an exquisite design here that we could put our best scientists and even put AI into trying to design, and we could put a lot of time into it, and we still wouldn't come close to what we already have.
What was your aha moment? Because you describe, you know, a childhood. I'm guessing here, but I'm probably pretty close, right? Some determined, no free will, atheist, reductionist mindset, which prevails. It's not fully 100% of science, but it certainly is the dominating factor there. But to get out of that, to drive off of that freeway, did you have an aha moment?
I've had a series of aha moments. I mean, I would say that I've had a symphony of aha moments.
Give me the first one. I mean, and what I mean by that is, I was in my early 20s. This show's not about me; it's about you. But I was in my early 20s. I read something. Somebody gave me something. I was in early 20s. I was 20, 21. And I went, no, what? The world is a lie, right? It was one of those things. And I couldn't function for a couple of weeks. It was a really big, you know, everything. It was like an Alfred Hitchcock camera pullback, right? You know, it was one of those things. So take me through that. Did you have one of those moments?
Well, yeah, I mean, well, for me, it was never reading something. You know, one of the problems with reading something is that it's engaging your analytical mind. And so if you're already caught into that sort of analytical, judgmental, you know, way of assessing information, you're kind of siloed into a certain way of processing things. So for me, my experiences were ones that were not me reading something.
It was a real-time, tangible moment?
Well, okay, so let me give you my first example. Okay, so what was happening was that I had made a decision that I was going to apply to medical school because I wanted to become a neurosurgeon. And the reason why I wanted to become a neurosurgeon was I was engaged in research in neuroscience laboratories where I was doing recordings from crayfish axons. Okay, I was you know, creating microelectrodes and measuring, you know, the changes in the axon potential, you know, and how it responded to different drugs that would interfere with different ion movements and et cetera. Just standard neuroscience. I was going to go to graduate school in neuroscience. And then I had people say to me, well, if what you're really interested in is human consciousness, maybe you should become a neurosurgeon. And I thought, oh, okay. And I thought, oh, I'll apply to medical school and become a neurosurgeon, because I knew that neurosurgeons, when they're operating on a patient, they don't put them under anesthesia because the brain has no pain receptors. And so what they're wanting to do is they're wanting to know what that particular part of the brain is involved in, but they don't want to cut out a part of your brain that's going to interfere in your major functioning. And so they're doing these real-time stimulations and recordings from your brain and going, oh, what does this do? And somebody go, oh, well, that brought back this memory of blah, 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 blah. And I thought, this is how I can be somebody who's not harming any animals. I can be understanding the brain and understanding the questions that I'm most interested in. It made sense to go to medical school. And so here I am, but at the same time, I was gifted at math as a child. I was a math prodigy. And so I was and math for me provided a sense of order. I come from a family of mathematicians and musicians, and it's like we're pattern recognizers. Okay. And so math provided this beautiful way of seeing the patterns and things and putting a language behind that. And so I was taking an advanced math course just for fun. And this woman is sitting next to me in class, and she says, so where are you going to graduate school in math? And I said, well, I'm not going to graduate school in math. I'm going to go to medical school. And she goes, what? You're throwing away God's gift to you to go to medical school? And I said, and I looked at her because I came from this materialistic, scientific, reductionistic thing. I looked at her and I said, you've gotten this far in math and you believe in God?
Right.
And she looked at me and she said, you've gotten this far in math and you don't?
Wow. She said it out loud. She said it out loud.
She said it out loud. And I said to her, I said, hey, at this point, I'm like 21 years old. Okay. And I said to her, I said, listen, I said, you can't, this is like a chasm this is like asking me to take a giant leap from one side of the Grand Canyon to the other side of the Grand Canyon. I mean, I cannot even imagine believing in God.
You still have to go visit your family on holiday, right?
I just couldn't even imagine. I mean, it's just like you can't believe in that just because, I just it just didn't compute. It created cognitive dissonance for me. And yet at the same time, it's like, okay, you must have been raised with religion. You were brought up with that from such an early age that you believe that. I was brought up with science. I believe this. Never the twain shall meet. And I said to her, I wish I believed in God. I mean, if I believed in God, then all of this suffering that I have witnessed in my life, that I've personally experienced, that I've witnessed, it would create a whole other context into which I could understand that. But I don't have that context into which I can understand it. I can't go there. I can't go there. I go, oh yeah, I wish I believed in God, but I can't. Okay. So what happens is the next morning, I'm leaving the chemistry building. I was leaving my organic chemistry lab, and I'm walking across the street inside the campus. That's a one-way street, and it's raining, and there are all these cars parked along the street on my side, and in my hand, I have all of these applications to go to medical school, and I'm walking across the street, and the next thing I remember is coming to on a neurosurgery floor after having been unconscious for several hours. And at first, I come to consciousness, and I'm like, oh, I'm dreaming I'm a patient on a neurosurgery floor because because I'm applying to be a neurosurgeon. They're like, no, you were in an accident. You know? I'm like, what? I was in an accident? And then, you know, when the reality hit me that, no, this actually was the reality that I was in now, I thought, what's the last thing I remember? And then I remembered leaving the chemistry building. And then I was like, what's the last thing I remember before that? I was like, the last thing I remembered was saying to that woman, I wish I believed in God. And there was something different in me, and I couldn't articulate what it was, but there was something happened during that gap of time such that somehow this concept that a God existed made sense.
The next natural question here is, before this event, what were your thoughts on consciousness? Was it physical
Totally.
or non-physical? Right? It was
Totally.
physical.
I was
Right.
totally immersed in the materialist model. I mean, I didn't know how it connected. I didn't know how it happened, but I had so much confidence in these people who were further along in this thing that I thought, like, who am I to question it? You know, that they obviously are leading me along this path. That's the path for me to pursue. I just didn't question it at all. And so, after that occurred, it created something different in me, but because I had no memory of what happened to me, it didn't create something enough to totally shift me out of a materialistic paradigm. What it did was it's sort of like, it's almost like it cocked the gun. Okay.
Right,
It set the stage.
That's fascinating. What happened? So
the next thing that happened was, so I go on, even though I had major headaches and, just really,
Did you bump your head? Were you run
Oh,
down?
I had severe concussion syndrome, but I still managed to take all my tests, pass everything I needed to do, go into medical school, get accepted into the #1 medical school at the time, Johns Hopkins. I go through all of that medical school. I go through all my training in psychiatry. And it wasn't until, and I'm not questioning any of this, but I'm just telling you that this is what literally set the stage, that I didn't have any way of making sense of it. So here I am, I'm on faculty at Harvard, and I get called in to see this woman because I was the director of the consultation liaison service. And so that's the service that consults to the medical and surgical floors when they think that there's a patient who has something psychiatric going on. So it might be that they aren't compliant with the treatment plan and they want a psychiatrist to come in and intervene, or maybe it's their management problem, or it may be that they think that this person really doesn't have a medical issue and that it's really a psychological issue and that they're just having these symptoms because they haven't dealt with some emotion. So they would bring in a psychiatrist, and I'd be the person that would come in there to see these people. And so I was called in on this woman who had come in the night before for a suspected heart attack. And back then, it took a day or more in order to find out if somebody had actually had a heart attack, because you had to wait for these blood tests to come back to show whether or not you had these enzymes that were elevated as a result of a heart attack. And so she had been admitted. Right after admission, she wanted to leave because she was seeing ghosts, and she was telling people that, and she wanted to leave. And of course, the way that I was trained as a psychiatrist, the way all medical professionals are trained as a psychiatrist, if somebody says they're wanting to leave the hospital because they see ghosts, it's like, okay, call the psychiatrist, they're crazy. Obviously, they need to get certified so that they just stay there long enough for us to finish our job and then figure out what to do. She's obviously, she's not getting enough blood to her brain or whatever it is that she's having these experiences. That's the medical model that they put it into. And so I was called in and I go to see her, and the first thing she says to me is, yeah, I'm seeing all these ghosts and it's really freaky and I want to leave. And I said, yeah, I can understand that if you can see ghosts, then being in a hospital would be a really problematic thing, because there are going to be a lot of them here because people die here all the time. I said, but, that's different from saying that, you need to leave. I mean, we're concerned you might have a heart attack. So my approach is to try to work with the person, not just go, oh, okay, that woman's crazy, I'm going to go sign the paperwork, which is what a lot of people would do. And I was like, no, I want to work with this woman, get her to understand. And she was half Native American and half African American. And I was just like, she was a very, interesting woman. And and she says, well, I was born with a caul over my face and it gave me this psychic ability. And I've always been able to know things that I don't know how I know them. And she said, I don't make a living doing this, but it is something that I do. And she said, and I already know that all my tests are going to come back normal. So that's yet another reason why I should go home. And I said, well, that's all very, very interesting. I said, but can we talk a little bit more about this? And she said, I'm looking at you and I'm getting a really interesting reading. Do you mind if I just tell you what I see? And I go, yeah, sure, go ahead. Tell me what you see. She goes, well, you're married to a chemist. And at the time I was married to someone who was a biochemist. And she goes, and he's applying for a job right now in 2 different cities. Well, that very week, he was applying for a job back at Johns Hopkins, where we both were, and for a job in San Diego. And she said, and in his heart of hearts, he really wants to go to one place, but you'll end up in the other one. And I knew in his heart of hearts, he wanted to go back to Johns Hopkins. I mean, that's where we met. We had friends there. He was, 13th generation Baltimorean. And to him, the West Coast was always a bit, suspect, a little bit woo-woo. And so, and she's like, I'm like, oh, so she got my attention when she said all that. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. I said, well, where do you think we'll end up? And she said, well, name a bunch of cities. And so I named off a bunch of cities. She goes, San Diego, you'll end up in San Diego. And we ended up in San Diego. Mm-hmm. And then she started telling me a bunch of other stuff about myself. And everything she said about me was stuff that there was no way she could know that. And I knew that what she was saying was true because it was either in the present or my past. And it wasn't something people at Harvard knew. And number 2, she told me things about the future. And over time, every one of those things that she said about the future came true. And so after I ended up moving to the West Coast with my husband, and, I'm still in academia, took a position at UC San Diego. Always in the back of my mind was, okay, I cannot for the life of me figure out a way to understand this with the model. It's bad enough that we can't understand just the basics of consciousness. And now this is like a real monkey wrench thrown in my career path.
What about the rest of the mainstream too, as well, when it comes to neuroscience and brain scientists? Do they give a crap? Do they think about this?
No, they don't think about it. No, I mean, it's so much of science has been, scientists have become so specialized, because it's like you want to become like the best in this is your little fiefdom. Okay. And so in order to create a fiefdom, you have to become more and more narrow in your scope. And then at the same time, there's also this extremely materialistic model within mainstream academic science that don't question that, because you'll never get a grant. You'll never ascend the ladder. And for me, there was just something different about my makeup, such that I literally walked away from academia because it meant more to me. I didn't become a scientist to ascend a ladder in academia. I went into science because I'm really a truth seeker, and it was that curiosity that my father instilled in me that made me become a scientist, not any sort of, seeking status or blah, blah, blah. And when I was in academia, I really became really clear very early on that there isn't the open-mindedness that we would like to think, that there isn't the open forum for discussion of alternative viewpoints. It just doesn't exist.
Is that a newer phenomenon? If we go back, and I repeat this so much because I want everybody to just understand this. But to me, we have about 300 years of real science behind us, right? A rough number, but right in there. But I think that it all changed with Newton, and Newton was like one of the last everyman. He did everything, right? It was religion, it was alchemy, it was science, it was math, it was physics, and he just he had a worldview that was different, and that affected the way that he wanted to do his work. But it hasn't been that way for almost 300 years. Everybody's gotten more and more narrow.
More than 300 years, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yes. So what happened is, think of it this way, okay? During the age of reason and the introduction of the scientific method, okay, which says that all science can study is that which is objective, which means you're not allowed to have any subjective component. You're not allowed to have any intuitive component. You're not allowed to have, it has to be something that is separate from you and measurable.
Observable and measurable.
Right. Observable, measurable, separate.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the realm of science, and anything else is the realm of religion. So what happened during the age of reason is there was like the division of knowledge that used to be both of those things working together was like, it was carving it out, just going, you take this, we'll take that. And it was between church and science. And then the two were set, they created their own little fiefdoms. And what we lost was the way that they can inform one another.
Yeah, think outside of the box. It's really that simple. And then get a question going and go and chase it down instead of just staying in your lane. And then what about, this is kind of a segue, it's staying on the same subject. When we start to apply certain things like somebody that has a past life recall, or they come out of a coma speaking French, even worse, Mandarin, right? whatever it may be, right? They become some scientific genius or mathematics savant, whatever it. These impossible things that they were never exposed to before suddenly happen. Now, that would say to me that something is going on outside of the brain, right? That is coming back into the brain, that it wasn't already there and was triggered. That seems like some pretty positive research to go and to look into these fields.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's really what I've been focusing on is, I mean, I have been focusing on savant syndrome, which is something that is recognized by science because they can't deny it. They can't deny that there are these people that, gee, they know things we don't understand how they know it. And not only do you have savants who are autistic, okay, and which people who are autistic, there's a higher percentage of savant syndrome in them than in neurotypical people. Higher percentage of people who have savant syndrome who are blind, okay, and there's this long history of people losing sight, either from birth or within the first year, and being seers, being prophets. And then another form of savant syndrome is what we call acquired savant syndrome, where you have somebody they're just your normal Joe, and they boom, they get hit by lightning. They have their head hit, like my head was hit, where they go into a concussion and they wake up, and they somehow are processing information differently. And to me, that is the most interesting phenomena that we as neuroscientists can be studying. Everything else is just, I don't know. I mean, it's boring, quite frankly.
Yeah, well, it's just ones and zeros. It's stuff that you can measure, right?
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, and I'm interested in understanding these things that challenge the. That's how science advances is if you're looking at the anomalies that challenge it. That you go, well, wait a minute. Okay, it's like, to me, if to ignore those things that don't fit into your current theory, but yet they've got good evidence. I mean, excellent evidence for it, irrefutable evidence for them. But to ignore them because they don't fit into your theory, it's like your theory is not going to be. If it doesn't fit into your theory, then your theory is no good. That's
now,
my
doesn't a materialistic, deterministic, no free will thinking atheist scientist still has deja vu? Explain that to me, right? But they don't want it. Is it that they don't want to admit it, or because they can't see it or test it, then therefore it's not interesting? But they're experiencing the same phenomena. They're experiencing synchronicities. Right? They have dreams, maybe near-death experiences, maybe telepathy, maybe they have a twin that they communicate with. But because it's getting into the edge of woo and supernatural, they leave it alone and they don't ponder.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, yeah. If you look at the surveys that are done, with scientists, for example. And, it's just sort of like, well, nobody has to know who you are and how you're answering this. I mean, something like 90% of them answer that they've had those kinds of experiences. And yet what they have to do is they have to shelve it. Instead of that, what's different about them versus me is that for me, having one of those experiences makes me go, oh, I'm going in this direction. For them, it's like, interesting, not going to go there. For, whatever that is, it says about their personality type, their conditioning, what their goals are, for what they're trying to achieve.
The funding environment.
Whatever it is, I'm not going to judge them, but it's a common phenomena that they have a different response than I do. I just know that for me, I have those kind of experiences. I'm like, oh, what was that? It's not the norm. It's not your average scientist.
What's the best example of that there is something going on beyond chemistry and particles? Is it telepathy? Is it NDEs? Is it deja vu? I think is a really good example. Synchronicities. What do you think is the best example that shows the world that there is something else, something extraordinary?
Oh, there's so many. There's so many examples. There's so many good examples. I mean, I think one of the problems that you run into with things like, well, here we are, we're living in a world where now, okay, all kinds of things can be created artificially, photoshopped, et cetera, et cetera. We've got the internet, people can access information off of the internet. And so all of the skepticism that can enter in and say, well, how is it that they knew this or that? I mean, all of that enters in a way that it doesn't become as compelling. To me, I mean, I think the answer really is just the composite of all of it, the out of body experiences and near death experiences people have had, where the information they obtained during the out of body experience was was verified. That it's like, oh, how did you get that information about what was going on, miles away, while you're there, flatlined, in the OR. Okay. I mean, that kind of information. But that requires for people to believe, certain things happen. Okay. So that's one of the reasons why I've focused on telepathy, where people can see in real time, here are these two individuals, and this one knows this information, this one doesn't, and you literally see this one somehow gets the information from the other, and it's happening over and over and over again in real time. So that's why I've focused on it. Not that I think that it's necessarily the best example, but in this world that we live where there's the internet and there's Photoshop and all of this stuff, it's one in which if people experience it, it creates that biggest aha.
But I would say, I'm not going to go 100%. I'm not going to go that high. But I would say the majority of people on this planet, from any segment of society, has had something supernatural, paranormal happen to them, and they are okay with talking about it. But science is not.
That's right.
That's the problem, isn't it?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And what I really believe, and part of why I mean, I've published scientific articles. It's hard to get a lot of this stuff in peer-reviewed journals, not because it's not scientifically valid or well done, but you have to get through the censorship that is the editorial board that's really, they get a lot of flack, and sometimes even have had to remove articles if it doesn't fit the materialist paradigm. But to me, this next scientific revolution is going to actually happen more on a grassroots level, because as people, here's how I see it, is that as people just say, I'm not waiting for science to tell me this stuff is real, I just know it's real. So science stops being the God.
Right.
The gatekeeper to knowledge. You're disempowering them as a populace, and eventually you're saying the emperor has no clothes. And that's how. So rather than the scientific revolution happening within science, and they will change, and I already see it happening in response to realizing that you can't deny these many people's reality for that long. You can't keep a lid on something that many people are now openly discussing.
Right. And do you know who Sean Carroll is?
No.
Okay, Sean Carroll, he's one of those rock star physicist dudes, okay? And brilliant. He's brilliant. He really is. And he calls himself a physicist, theoretical physicist / philosopher. Okay, he's trying to cover all his bases. But anyway, in this AMA last year, and I listen to him all the time. I've got his books, and I think he's brilliant. But sometimes I get really turned off. And he said this. He's doing an AMA, and he's going through his questions. And one of the questions comes up, and it was a paid question, so he had to read it, right? And he even said that. This is a Patreon member, and this is the question submitted. I'm going to read it. Sean, what do you think about consciousness? Right? And he goes, I'm paraphrasing, but it's nearly a direct quote. I don't have time to think about something that I can't see. What? That was his answer.
Even though he experiences it all the time. I mean, the reality is the one thing that we know for sure we experience is our own consciousness.
It's fascinating. Okay, so before we're going to head to a break in about 9 minutes, and I want to dive into this before we come back after the break. Where do you think consciousness exists if it's non-physical? Because I think that physics, as much as they don't want to admit it, they are starting to answer these questions for us with entanglement, non-local questions, the metaverse, the multiverse, parallel worlds, quantum work, and how qubits work. It's starting to suggest something else existing beyond our own reality. And I think that that's pretty crazy, right? Where do you think consciousness is resting?
Well, and that was another epiphany that I had. And I mean, I had several epiphanies between the ones that I've already told you about and this one. Okay, so just for you to realize.
So this will be number 3. Okay.
But this is not number 3. This is probably number 15 or something.
Okay, fair enough.
But what I realized was, and I was asked to be part of a a gathering of scientists to found a new scientific academy called the Academy for the Advancement of Post-Materialist Sciences.
Ooh.
And basically back in 2014, there was a conference in which there were several hundred scientists, all of whom, then these are scientists with PhDs, and credentials, published papers and whatnot, that we all said the evidence is overwhelming that the materialist model is incorrect or incomplete. And that we need, instead of waiting for the Academy of Sciences to accept our point of view and to keep having them say, well, we're not going to publish your paper, we're not going to this or that, we're going to found our own academy. And we did. And so when I attended this conference, this small gathering, okay, that was only 13, 14 scientists in Tucson, Arizona, being headed up by Gary Schwartz and Marjorie Wollicott. Gary said to us as a group, he said, because he was really collecting to him who he thought were the greatest minds thinking about these questions, okay, whose work he really respected. He said, do you think, beyond just saying post-materialist, do you think that there is enough evidence to say that consciousness is primary and fundamental?
That's a big step. I love it too.
It's a huge step.
Yeah.
And I had to go. I was like, oh. And my mind, it was like somebody giving you a Rubik cube, and somehow it's like, instead of twisting it this and this way, twist it this and that way. Because I'm a puzzle solver. That's just what my mind does as a pattern thinker. And so I started thinking about all of the collective information that's out there about what we know about the brain and consciousness and all these different phenomena that have been documented and reported. And I realized that all of a sudden it all fit. If instead of thinking that the brain creates consciousness, that we started to think of consciousness as being the creative force.
Right. It's not that big of a leap. You know why? You know why? I'm going to say this, and I'm not a PhD. I just play one on TV, Diane. Is this. If that is the case, if we follow that dogma, that there's a little piece of consciousness in every particle, right? And you amass enough of this together then consciousness arises out of that. Well, that would say to me that a bowling ball is sentient.
Well,
Right?
I mean, a lot of people will go that far.
Yeah.
A lot of people will go that far, but we don't need to go that far.
But you understand my point, right?
I do
have
understand your point, and the point that I'm trying to make is more because you're going to lose a lot of people if you want them to think that a bowling ball is sentient. I'm sorry. That's gonna.
But that's what a chemist, somebody that's working on this that says, this is just a chemical reaction that's happening here.
Well, and that may well be. I mean, that is one of the models, is this idea of panpsychism. That consciousness is in everything. Okay, but what I'm suggesting is that at a minimum, okay, that consciousness is what plays a fundamental role in creating what we think of as reality. Okay, that for example, there appears to be like an energy field that is like the blueprint that guides all of those 100,000 interactions, biochemical interactions per second that occur when all those cells are dividing and creating a life form. Okay, there's a blueprint for that, and it's to think it's the DNA is a blueprint, but it's not. It's more of a crystallized form of the blueprint, but not the blueprint itself. If you understand what I'm saying,
I do understand that. I do understand that. And when we have something as crazy as the amount of calculations and signals that our eyes create in a second, right? And fires that back to our brain is converting all of that into our reality. And the amount of data that is happening, right, between the light going into your eyes and hitting your brain and then turning that into the materialistic world, right? That's insane. That is divine to me. I don't think that is an accident. I don't think that was lightning hitting a couple of amino acids on a crystal in a creek bed, 4 billion years ago, and that life emerged out of that. And Homo sapiens sapiens got 46 chromosome pairs, and it's just all just chance.
Yeah,
I don't buy into that. There's something else going on.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it stretches the imagination more to believe what the materialistic scientific perspective is than the perspective that you're expressing. And within science, I mean, the irony is within science, you're supposed to take the simplest explanation to explain the results.
Can an anthropologist explain? We're going to head to a break in a second, and then we'll come back. Can an anthropologist effectively explain why primates have 48 chromosome pairs and Homo sapiens sapien has 46 chromosome pairs, but yet we are the ones building radio telescopes?
No.
There's a lot of data in those two pairs. It's a lot of information. You would think that primates would be the dominant species.
Well, I mean, there are species that are far less complex in terms of how we define complexity than us, that actually have more chromosomal material than us. So we have to get out of that. It's part of that materialistic programming for people to even think there's a one-to-one correspondence between any of those things and then what we actually, just experience.
Did we, you and I, did we have 48 pairs at one time, and then nature came in and did a CRISPR snip?
We might have had 48 at one time. I don't know if it was nature that did this, the CRISPR snip, or something else.
Are you going to go there? What do you mean something else? Are you going to go there? I want to hear your answer. Go ahead. I mean, you're out of the closet, Diane. You're out. So it's okay. You're in a safe space.
Well, I'm just saying that at this point, all bets are off. Because there are just too many unexplained. Okay, and there's too many things that I've heard labeled as, oh, well, that's a crazy idea, that then actually started to make sense. And actually, I'm not the only one, and actually some of that stuff became accepted science in the course of my lifetime. And so, what happened there? I don't know. But was there an intentional genetic manipulation? I mean, nature, I understand how nature works. I mean, from having studied evolution and, biology, I understand how nature works. And I'm not going to attribute certain things to nature that don't seem to fit a certain pattern that we know about how nature works.
Do you think, you know what, let's take a break, but you can answer this question when we come back. There are only so many particles, at least in our part of the universe. Maybe there's something going on the other side. I don't know. But there's only so many particles and only so many ways that they can combine. That's it. It's simple math. There isn't anything beyond a certain point, right? So if that's the case, and we have asteroids and meteors flying around the universe with the basic sugars of RNA on them, that would suggest to me that particle combination only happens that's it, and that this is flying around the vacuum of space, and that this is life in the universe. This isn't, we are not unique, and that it must be going on everywhere. If it's going on in our little slice of the universe, our star system, it must be going on everywhere. And I don't think that is a stretch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll save your answer for after the break. Our guest tonight, Diane Hennessy. Diane, this is a perfect conversation. We will continue after this. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. Stay with us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get your alerts and access to over 2,000 videos. Click that subscribe button right now. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and get the Fade to Black official podcast. 2,000 episodes, all of them commercial free for just $2 a month. Watch Into the Vortex on Gaia TV. It's Fade to Black for the screen. Simple to do. Go to Gaia.com, search Jimmy Church, or click on the link below. Follow Fade to Black on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Get all of the show updates every single day. It's now called X, but who cares? How you doing? Jimmy Church here. Special announcement. Get your Fade to Black t-shirts. That's right. Help support the show. Help support everything that we do over here. We've got 2 t-shirts. We've got 2 ways to get them. Get your Fade to Black t-shirt today. Go Backley Tappy. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and become a Fadernaut. Get a membership. That's right. Everything is commercial free. You have access to downloads, and you get to call yourself a Fadernaut. River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church, and we lost Diane during the break, and I'm wondering where she is. So let me find her and see if she lost her internet connection or what is going on. So just stay with me. I'm going to send her a quick email and see what's going on. There she is. We lost you. Okay, so we'll see where everything is at. I left the studio and came back, and so I didn't see what went on with that. And I'm hoping I didn't accidentally kick her out of the studio. I don't think I did do that. So we're talking about the brain tonight and consciousness. And one of the questions that I want to get to, that I set the stage for, is this a universal thing? Is this going on throughout the universe? And is science interested in that part of it? And does science have an interest in, or will they eventually make breakthroughs into where what consciousness is? I think these are the big questions. So I'm waiting to see what is going on with that. And so I was looking at some of the comments that were going on in the chat through all of this. And it was interesting at the beginning of the show when Diane was asking about where the audience understanding of all of this is, all of this science. And this is a very smart audience. And yes, we do. We are fully engaged and want to know these things. And when we look at, we started to jump into savants, and you look at something, savant syndrome, and we take a look at that, and then you look at somebody like Einstein, who is classified as a genius. Well, what's the difference between genius and savant? And is savant up another level? Right. That's also one of my big questions with all of this and how the brain operates. And then we push it one step further. And when we get into telepathy or telekinesis or the power of the brain connecting to somebody else's brain, somebody else's mind, or into something else in the non-material world, what is going on there, and what is the power of the brain? And then I have one other question, where the size of the human brain is one thing and the power of it, but it's not the biggest brain on this planet. There are plenty of mammals on this planet that have much bigger brains than ours. Are they using 5% of their brain? as nature, did we change? Did at some point in our evolution, did we use more of our brain and we're using less today? And what is the science into and the biology of looking into the way mammals operate, and how much of their brain capacity are they actually using? So these are all the big questions. I'm wondering if Diane had a power outage or if there was something else going on and she lost her internet. Very interesting. Sorry, I've got a scratch in my throat. So while we're waiting for Diane to come back, let's see. Let me check my email here. Yeah, I've got no email response too as well. I think she might have had a power outage. Very strange. Very strange. Not getting back via email would suggest that the internet may be lost. I don't know. All right, let's throw this over to the chat. Do you guys have any questions for me? How did the pyramid makers know the distance to the sun? Well, did they? Or again, is that coincidence? Those ideas put behind that and this is apparently, I'm going to say that because when we look at the math and what is actually going on with the pyramids, the Great Pyramid specifically, that they had developed an understanding that A, the earth was round, B, that apparently they had the circumference of the earth, the equator, the measurement of that, and the size of the earth. And could you turn around and equate that to different things like the moon, and then of course to the sun? Now, or is it just a coincidence in the math when we put all of this together, and then it correlates with the distance to the sun or the speed of light or different mathematical formulas, that arrive out of this? I don't know. I think that is a great question. I think about that all the time. We had an X-class solar flare last night about 9:30. Yeah, and I will say this: I've had over the last 48 hours, and certainly today's Wednesday, over the weekend, I had numerous computer issues that were just one thing after another. And it seemed like I was constantly working through that. Wasn't thinking about the solar flares, wasn't thinking about satellites or the internet, or is that the issue? Or is that what's going on? I was busy, and you know how you do that. You get into that computer zone and you're constantly fixing issues and constantly doing this and doing that and chasing down mechanical or software solutions to everything. Eventually worked out, but everybody knows what I went through on Monday and with Douglas Grunther. That was strange. Now I'm resetting things. I went through a power outage here, and it's not just what's going on in here, but I have TVs that are running on Wi-Fi. This studio doesn't run on Wi-Fi. Everything here is hardwired. Every computer here has an Ethernet cable that goes to my router. So there isn't any Wi-Fi in here, but it was my TVs, it was my phone, my iPads. Everything was just wonky, like all at the same time, just doing strange things. And it just seemed like I was just chasing my tail all weekend long, fixing issues on things and resetting things. And then it came to Monday night, boom. Yeah, it was strange, and reset everything. Yeah, Diane is like missing. Yeah, very strange. Very strange. Okay, so grid goes down. We all practice our telepathy. I think about that all the time. If Do you remember? It was about 10 years ago. It was about 10 years ago, 9 years ago. And I had this strange revelation. I got up in the morning and I was making coffee and I was at the kitchen window in front of the sink looking out into the backyard. And I'm watching everything just do its thing. And I had this strange thought. What if the power was out and I couldn't make my coffee? Right? And so I would struggle with doing a few things, going out to the fuse box. Let's check the fuses. My electric bill is paid. Is there something else? Is there a car accident down the street? Would a transformer blow out? Is this something local? Didn't feel an earthquake. And because of that, and then you go and you check your phone and the internet is not working. And so you can't look for down detector. You can't do that. No cell service. Okay, well, I'll just wait for the power to come back on and see what is going on. I guess the cell towers locally are also down. And I've gone through this. So how long would it take to go from this localized thing inside of my house to finding out that there's something bigger going on, that there was an EMP that blew out the satellites and that there's no electricity in the United States or the world? And how long would it take from that moment of not being able to make coffee to total chaos? How long? How long? How long? I don't know. A day? How long does it take for the news to travel? Right? If you're not getting news on your phone, if you're not, accessing the world, then how is everybody else getting their information? And how long is it before it is crazy town? So I just stepped back and I analyzed this, and I talked about this and I wrote about this quite a bit. Here in Los Angeles, we basically have two roads that access the rest of the world. We have the 5 freeway, we have the 10 freeway. All right. That's it. And everything is brought here. The water is brought here. The food is brought here. There's no farms and no, everything is brought in. So how long from that moment of not being able to make coffee to there not being anything here? Any food, any water, anything? Days? A week? I mean, how long? No gas, right? How long to crazy? Right? Where you've got to lock your doors and you've got angry mobs running the streets. How long? And are you prepared for that? That's a crazy thought. So it was about 4 months ago. All right, 4 months ago. I'm sitting, it was on a weekend, and it was early in the morning, and I had just gotten back from a ride on my Harley. And I came in, I sat down, it was like 9 o'clock, and the power went out. Blink, just like that. And I was like, oh, okay, all right. Strange. And I'll wait for the power to come, and it didn't. And I go to my cell phone. Remember, now I don't have Wi-Fi, right? So I go to my cell phone, and I had cell service. So I was able to access the internet, and I go to SoCal Edison, SCE, and I see there, and I get a text from them. And so I was able to access their website, and the text said power's out. And the cell towers, okay, so what had happened was there's a substation down the street. It caught on fire. All right. Now, and then the 2 or 3 local cell towers that were here then stopped working. And then I had no cell phone. All right. And I was getting intermittent text throughout the day. And it was weird. Like a cell tower would activate for a minute, or I would get into a certain spot, and I would get a text coming in, and it was saying that service was going to be restored at 10 o'clock that night due to a fire at the substation. So for that day, I had no cell phone, I had no internet, and I had no electricity. Totally cut off. I did get in my Jeep and I drove out, and I was able to get to another cell phone thing and see that, okay, all right, this is a localized issue. But it was a crazy feeling to not have, while at home, not have access to the news, not have access to the internet, email. Nobody could reach me. I couldn't make phone calls, and certainly had no power in the house. And yeah, everything becomes an issue. Food, right? Do I open the refrigerator? Do I leave it closed? All of this, thank goodness it wasn't hot that day. Like, I didn't need my air conditioner. That was the one thing that I thought about. I was like, man, thinking it's 80 degrees outside. So it's not that big of an issue. But it goes back to my original statement. Like, what is happening with Diane right now? Right, where something is, and you are immediately just cut off, right? And how we rely so much on email or text or phones or anything like that. It's crazy to me, and how fast do we just go into tribal mode? Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Generator. Yeah, that's a really good point. So after that, it was the next day. I go to a few different outlet stores. I go to Walmart, I go to Home Depot, I go to Lowe's, and I'm looking at generators. And I was doing the research on how to bring a generator online at your house, how to wire it into your electrical box, right? And how that was a crazy process, where you need an electrician involved with that. And I never went. Now I have a small generator now, so if anything goes down, I can fire that up. I've got some extra gas, and I can plug in a few things if I need to, and I've got the extension cords. But yeah, and that was the other thing. When I went to Walmart and Lowe's and Home Depot the next day, they were sold out. Yeah, big run on generators here in Palmdale. Oh man, Bill says we have a gasoline generator for when the power is out for a few days, and you've got it all wired up. Okay, I didn't take the next step. I did look into it, and I went, I just don't know if I can handle jumping into something that complex and getting it set up. But yeah, I did look into it. Okay. Man, Diana's gone. Diane. It is Diane. Let me try one thing here. And I'm going to take another break. Up.
It's
okay.
The strangest thing. Can you hear me?
I got you back. Okay.
I lost the internet right after that last comment, and I can't access you on my computer. I can't access you on someone else's computer. I had to borrow someone's iPad. Okay. And I mean, it's the strange. I couldn't even access my email to let you know what was going on.
Yeah, I wrote you an
freakiest thing. It's
Yep.
the freakiest thing because I mean, and the timing of it was really interesting. You're like, going, oh, do you think it could be this or that? And like, oh, we'll take a break, and then like, and then it's like, no internet. Are you kidding
Yeah,
me?
I love.
I can't do anything on my phone. I can't do anything on my computer, on somebody else's computer. I mean, insane.
See, that's what happens. I don't freak out anymore, Diane. I don't. But it's right when you get into a sensitive subject like we are, and this is sensitive, it's really funny. Somebody, I don't want to say there's puppet masters, but I don't think it's coincidence. I don't. I was just chatting with the audience and talking about this phenomenon that we find ourselves in today, which is something new, which is it's great to be connected, but everything is connected. The power grid, the lights, the water systems, the banking, your simple life, texting, connection with family and friends, and like what we are doing right now. It all depends on that one thing. And if that one thing gets removed, you got nothing, right? And just like you were just saying, you couldn't access your email. Now it's your phone. And I knew, I had told the audience, I said, I shot her an email. He is gone because I left to get coffee. I came back, you were gone. Right. And okay, all right. She tripped over a cable or whatever, right? She'll be back. But when you didn't come back and you didn't respond to the email, I was like, oh, this is something more catastrophic. This is something, there's something else going on here. So the question, let's pick up where we left off. And we'll just run for another 30 minutes and stuff. In that, what is, when we're talking about savant syndrome, and then we look at somebody like Einstein, who is higher on the food chain, right? Is it Einstein classified as a genius, or is it somebody with savant syndrome that has got absolutely superhuman abilities that in relative to everything else? What's the difference? Or is there a difference?
I don't even know that I would say that there's a difference. I mean, there are a lot of people who think Einstein was on the spectrum, and he may have even been a savant. I mean, he had an understanding of space-time that went beyond what people his generation really were capable of, and there seems to be, with the savants I'm working with, they seem to spend a lot of time in what we call non-local consciousness, which is probably the more fundamental consciousness.
Is science, let's stay right here, is the world of physics more woo than our woo world?
But let me say this. Okay, so I have a brother. So one of my brothers is a jazz musician, and the other brother is a theoretical physicist. And he is someone who I've had conversations with for over 25 years about consciousness. He turned me on to, the conversations between Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli, okay, where they were talking about the nature of synchronicities. But what you have is this pairing between psychologists who study consciousness, because that's what a psychologist is doing. If you're really digging into what's your inner experiences, what are your dreams, what's the symbolism that is meaningful to you, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's all dealing with consciousness. And a lot of the physicists from 100 years ago were pairing up with psychologists or mystics like Krishnamurti to basically, compare notes and say, we're all talking about the same thing.
Yeah, you're right about that.
And so what you have is that theoretical physics has always allowed, just like philosophy, they've always allowed you to expand the horizons of what is possible in a way that you are not permitted to if you're locked into biological and particularly the clinical sciences.
Wolfgang Pauli, I'm going to sound smarter than I really am, but let me say this: the Pauli principle, and which is that two particles, two atoms cannot occupy the same space, right? That is a deep physics statement, right? And that's the reason why our sun does what it does, right? That right there. Now, he did that without being able to observe any of this. And he had these very deep philosophical questions about the world where he is able to think through this. Physicists used to do that.
Exactly.
Right? It's really strange. Einstein, he worked his brain without observation. He thought about this stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's one of the things. My brother and I are really, we're two peas from the same pod. Quite literally. And, and that's part of why, we really enjoy the conversations we've had with one another, because we're approaching these things from, people thought I was going to become a physicist. Okay. But I went into neuropsychiatry. He's an expert on AI. Okay. And neural networks. And, and he and I have been talking about, and he's an expert on quantum computing and all of that. And so bringing these two worlds together, okay, where what you're thinking about is you're doing thought experiments. Okay. You're expanding beyond the observable in order to generate hypotheses so that you can then manifest the next reality. We all have to think beyond what we can measure in order to do something creative. And so we're allowed to do creative things within physics. Think about, who's personally experienced a black hole? And yet, that's like a standard, concept within physics. So they're allowed to do that. Similarly, psychologists, are allowed to talk about these concepts that are, they're not tangible, they're not measurable, but, but they're manipulable. We can manipulate the concept. It's all about, can you manipulate that concept? Okay, I can manipulate. What I mean by manipulate is, can you see how it relates to other things? Think of ways in which you can modify something and then see how that changes things. So both of those fields engage in thought experiments. But when you get into the biological sciences like biochemistry and cellular biology, they're not allowed to engage in thought experiments. And that's been more of where the focus has been. And these other things, they're allowed to have their thought experiments to a point.
You can, only to a point. And some of those thought experiments became legendary.
Yes.
That are still today are contemplated. And
that's right.
If you go back and you go back to Heisenberg and Schrodinger and Niels Bohr and Wolfgang, these cats back then were tripping, and they would go. Yeah. And they would get these ideas out. And then suddenly one of the accepted ideas today, and this is crazy, that you can look at something and change its state. Now, it's like, come on.
Yeah,
How rude do you want to get?
Absolutely. And see, that's the kind of thing that turns my brother and I on. Okay. And it's like having those, I mean, as a scientist who's not interested in just being a scientist who can say, oh, I'm a scientist at XYZ institution and I've got X number of, publications. No, both of us have wanted to do something that really contributes to advancing science. And oftentimes those scientists who dedicate their life to that don't get recognized in their own lifetime. And that's the chance that you take. But we both made that choice that we would rather take that thing than do something that we knew would be choosing to do something that to us didn't feel as meaningful.
Do you feel that entanglement is part of the mystery and the answer to a lot of these out-of-body experiences or telepathy or communication or connectedness, channeling communication, that this very basic thing, entanglement, could be the answer and checks so many of those boxes?
I don't think of it that way. I tend to, this is how I tend to think of it, is I think that entanglement is a clue to the true nature of things, but not causative. And what I mean by that is that, think of it this way. It's like, okay, because we don't understand what entanglement means. Like, how is it that you can have two particles that are connected, now separate zillions of miles away, and yet you change one and the other one instantaneously changes, and it's faster than the speed of light? Okay. Well, what if what we're calling entanglement is really that they never really were separate in the first place, because we don't really understand dimensions, that we're thinking of them as being separated by space or separated by time, but they're really not.
Check out the big brain on Diane. I never thought of it that way. But I do have, and I've talked to physicists about this, and they just want to poo-poo the idea out of the gate. That isn't telepathy a form of two entangled brains? Isn't that actually what we're talking about here? But no, there's too much information. You can't do that one particle at a time. And well, wait a minute. If you can entangle one pair, then what's the difference between two brains being entangled? But you don't understand.
Yeah, and see, this is, you really have to get into, and this is something that I looked into, over 30 years ago, like, for example, like string theory, where you're looking at, there are at least 10 or 11, dimensions. Okay. And it's like, well, where are those dimensions? Okay. Because you and I experience 3 spatial dimensions, and then the dimension of time, and how we experience it because of the way that we are wired. Okay. That just the programming of our brain that basically dictates what we experience, but not necessarily what reality is, but how we experience it. We experience it as a flow in only one direction. Now, some of us have these moments where we can experience it, where it's like, well, I'm not so sure that it's quite so,
defined.
Defined that, we're only in the moment and the future is here and we have to go from here to there. Maybe they all exist at the same time. Maybe time can be traveled back and forth. Maybe there's even retrocausation. And I mean, that's another theory within physics. Why do we treat time as a different kind of dimension than we treat the other spatial dimensions. So that just expand it that way, where you're thinking in terms of, that. Well, then think of it in terms of, well, if there really are, which string theory says there are, at least 10 dimensions, where are those dimensions? And how you were going to, if you can't perceive them, what you have to realize is that they're all really contained within what we think of as our 3.5 dimensional space.
That's right. And when the way that Brian Greene presents it, and I just find this fascinating, is that the space in between these dimensions is so small, but if you are there in that dimension, it's not small, right? And how does a goldfish in a fishbowl perceive the dimensionality of their world? Do they understand what's going on outside of it? No. Right?
Yeah, we can, we really, that's the thing, is that, we can't, like, as a small child, I read the book Flatland, and it's sort of like, when you have something that's 3-dimensional enter into a 2-dimensional world, you don't experience it as 3-dimensional. You still experience it as 2-dimensional, because you only experience it the way that it interfaces with your world, because you can't see beyond your own perceptual awareness. So that sphere, as it's passing through the plane of your 2-dimensional world, looks like a circle.
Yeah,
is it a circle? No, it's not a circle. It's got another dimension to it, and so imagine that there are all these other dimensions, such that and then when Einstein talked about space-time and gravity, he was like, gravity is really just the bending of space-time, such that it can fold back on itself. And so then if it folds back on itself, you can have different points in space-time touching one another.
He got into loops, man. He talked about this, time loops, and now here's the other crazy part in the little time that we have left, is the understanding that we have today of what is going on in our universe has changed so much in the last 30 years. It's extraordinary how much we have. We went from being a planet of one to now understanding that every single frigging star in the universe has at least one planet. That is a mind-blowing conclusion. And so all of those astrophysicists and theoretical, they have to contemplate this now. They are data-driven. And now this very fundamental thing, this question of what else is out there, well, that is starting to get answered. So how much of it is out there, and how wonderful it is that there's life everywhere. It's not a question of if, it's just a question of how much. And that answer is, it's a lot. It might be infinite. And that's what is driving science crazy today. That all of these questions that we had in the past that we couldn't answer are being answered. And I'll say this, and this is where I'm going. When the James Webb is taking these deep space images now, and in different spectrums, right? That consciousness, that is these spider webs of gases and dark energy and dark matter that are supporting the universe and expanding the universe and connecting between galaxies. Is that starting to support what consciousness may be, and the connectiveness of the universe all the way back to this planet and you and myself?
Well, I think that I think that when we're able to image that far out, okay, and what we're able to obtain from that, I think what it's doing is it really is for some people, it's creating an expansion of the reality for them, which I already knew beforehand. I didn't need that. But for a lot of people, what it's doing is it's letting them know, well, of course, we're not the only life in the universe. You know, and there's bound to be other civilizations out there. And not only that, a lot of these civilizations are probably a lot older than we are, and probably a lot more advanced. And so yes, it really is. You know, people can only accept information at a certain pace, you know, and I think that, and seeing the visual of that is helping people to accept that's what they're needing. I didn't need that. I already sort of conceptually knew it, but I think that's one of the advantages of having that kind of data, because it enables us to just go, okay, you thought this was the end. It goes even before that, beyond that,
Right,
beyond
right.
that, and beyond that, and beyond that. Okay, right?
So ET, right? ET arrives here, Diane,
Yeah.
and if they arrive here, that means that they are more advanced than us, because we didn't go to them, right? They're coming
Absolutely,
here, right?
absolutely. And
Geez.
you know, you don't have to do a lot to convince me that they're more involved than us. You do not have to convince me. Just look around you at what's going on the planet, and you can see we're not the most evolved consciousness in the universe. Let me I mean, am I being a little too political here?
No. You're absolutely spot on the money. And so it seems to me, this is where we can go materialistic for a second. Okay. Well, it seems to me that it is simple math. This is where I'll go with math. That if ET arrives here, then they have a grip on consciousness.
Absolutely.
Right? They do. They totally get it. They are in a consciousness driven world if they arrive here. And we're not there yet. We're getting close. We're getting closer, right? Because our ability to understand increases every day. And that's it. You touched upon that. And I think that's a really, really good point, that, you know, ET is going to get here and go, it ain't math. Give that stuff. It's not math, man. It's all about what's going on up here. It's consciousness.
Yeah. And I do think there's a huge shift that's happening on the planet right now. I really do.
How so?
Well, you know, I think that, first of all, I think that more and more people are waking up to realizing there's more to everything than what I was told. So I think that's going on. I'm seeing these children that I study coming in numbers that are unprecedented compared to what they used to be. And depending upon what your belief system is around this, I mean, I'm a scientist, and so, you know, I can't say one way or the other, but I must say it's very interesting that we're seeing more and more of these children who seem to be operating out of a very different consciousness than what we previously.
Do you think that DNA has been fundamentally modified in the last 20 years?
I can't say. I don't know if it's the DNA or if it is, you know, evolution occurring on some other level. I mean,
it's something advancing. Yeah.
Something's shifting. Something's shifting. I can't really say what it is. I mean, I really want to study
that and find out what it is that's shifting. But something is shifting, and I think that there are more and more individuals who are being born today who are coming in at a really advanced level of consciousness.
Are they using more of their brain?
I don't even know if it's that they're using more of their brain or that they are less. Let me put it this way. I think a lot of people have bought into a certain version of reality, and they're locked into it. And let's just call that reality the Matrix.
Okay.
And you have more and more people that are coming in, being born, that don't get locked into that. And I think part of that is because they don't become part of the system. They don't become part of just that collective that just accepts how things have been and the direction that they're going in. That they're more of the maverick energy, if you will. That they're more of this. They're here to help move us into a different state of consciousness. And whatever your belief system is around, why that might be, because I'm not here to really try to convince anybody of that. I'm just here to really describe as a scientist what I'm seeing. But I'm seeing a higher level of consciousness of beings that are being born to, perhaps it's because this is what's going to, if we're going to survive, if humans are going to survive on this planet, it's what's needed. And isn't that what evolutionary forces do? Is that there are forces, whether you believe that they're divinely driven, or that nature itself is divine, whatever it is you believe, whatever that doesn't matter as much as realizing that the forces are such that there's a push towards a level of consciousness that is more advanced, actually incarnating here on this planet.
Yeah, I see it as a parent. My daughter Nicole, right, who is about to be 30, which is crazy to me, but hanging out and raising her, right, hanging out with her friends, 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, 10 years old, and watching them interact and how advanced they are and what their concerns are so intellectual at the age of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And I think back when you and I were kids at the age of 5, I was making mud pies. Right?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the thing is, I mean, I really, and it's funny, I have a daughter who's 31, and I was going to name her Nicole, but I had already named our dog Nicole, and I thought, I can't take the dog's name and give it to my daughter, So anyway, but I love the name Nicole.
But you understand, as a parent, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about, because I love this generation that are this generation that are in there, that are, 40 and younger.
Yes.
Because I see that they are so advanced out of the gate. And that's actually what we need. And what they need is to have people that are of our generation helping them in whatever way we can, because they are the future, and they also are very, very, they don't need to be taught a lot, but they need to have us be available as resources and whatever it is that we have, because I think that there's something to be said for the wisdom of knowing what has existed before. It's like the two need to come together. Just like I wish that science and spirituality came back together too. It's like bringing things back together that will create a better future. And so I think that I feel like so connected with this younger generation. Absolutely.
Is it because it's part of the information age and the access to information? Is it the way society is?
I think they came in differently.
Yeah, I think DNA's been changed. Do you remember going back to the United Kingdom? They went through this period. I don't know if it was sparrows or finches that suddenly figured out how to pull the foil top off of their milk bottles that were being delivered to their houses, right? And suddenly, and it was a generational thing. One generation away, all of the towns in the area, all of the finches or sparrows, whatever they were, suddenly knew how to open up the milk bottles. And it was like it happened just like that. It wasn't a Darwinian 10 million year evolution thing. It happened in a couple of months.
Well, no, absolutely. One of the things which is an interesting thought that I've had, which is that, have you ever heard that saying that if you can imagine it, that's the first step, and then you can actualize it, you can manifest it? Okay, and so I look at my daughter's generation, and they're the generation who grew up with Harry Potter.
True.
And so their sense of what is possible for consciousness to achieve is so different from...
They get it. And the Powerpuff Girls. You can't leave that out. Diane, where can everybody follow your work and reach out to you?
So they can find me at DRDIANEHENNACY.com, and also my podcast that I'm doing with Kai Dickens is the telepathytapes.com. If they want a copy of my book, The ESP Enigma, they should contact me directly, because I'm the only one who has the physical copies of the book in limited numbers, and I'm happy to send signed copies to people.
Very good. I look forward to our next conversation. Keep doing what you're doing. Tonight was perfect. Had a little hiccup, but that hiccup was perfect. Thank you so much, Diane.
Thank you. Bye.
Behave. Thank you so much. Perfect night on the show. Dr. Diane Hennessy. And I want to remind everybody, the links to her website are below and on social media and over on our website. And that'll wrap tonight's show. Tomorrow night, everybody knows it is my birthday. So I'm going to be hanging out with all of you. All right? That's it. It's an AMA, AJA hangout all night long tomorrow night to celebrate my birthday. And let's do it together. Until then, all I've got is Go Backley Tappy. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Special thanks to Bill, John, Dex, Jessica, Dennis, and Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music by Doug Aldrich. Intro, Space Boy. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Go back, Lee Tappy.